The grand estate of the Montrose family shimmered under 1,000 lights, the kind that could make anyone believe happiness lived there. Laughter, crystal glasses, and the soft hum of violins floated through the air. But near the farthest corner of the ballroom stood Elena, unnoticed and unwanted, her delicate hands clutched around a glass of water, as if it could hide the tremor in her fingers. Tonight was her 21st birthday, the milestone that was supposed to mark the beginning of her life. And yet, she felt invisible among her own blood. Her father, Richard Montrose, a man of towering pride and cold manners, was surrounded by business partners, boasting about mergers and profits. Not once did his gaze wander toward his daughter. Across the marble floor, Victoria, her stepmother, laughed brightly at something trivial, every gesture calculated, every smile a performance. And beside her, Claudia, perfect Claudia, shone in a scarlet gown that commanded attention. She was everything Elena wasn't: glamorous, outspoken, adored. Guests flocked around her, while Elena's presence barely caused a ripple in the sea of silk and champagne. Elena had spent the entire afternoon preparing for this night. She had chosen a soft blue dress, simple, elegant, one she bought with her own small savings from tutoring children in secret. She had dared to hope her father might just for once look at her and see his daughter, not a reminder of her late mother. But as the evening unfolded, it became painfully clear that hope was a luxury her heart could no longer afford. Her father's brief speech confirmed it: a long list of business triumphs, a toast to his new partnership with a luxury brand, and finally, an afterthought. And yes, my daughter turns 21 today. Congratulations, Elena. 5 words. No warmth, no pride. The applause that followed was perfunctory, a polite nod from strangers. Something inside her chest hollowed out at the sound. Victoria's cool voice drifted over the music. Darling, try to smile. You look terribly gloomy. People will think we're neglecting you. Elena forced a weak smile, though tears pricked the corners of her eyes. I'm fine, she murmured, the words tasting like ash. Oh, I doubt that! Claudia's voice chimed in, mock-sweet and laced with venom. But maybe this will help. She handed Elena a flute of champagne, her painted lips curling. Elena hesitated, she never drank, but the eyes around her pressed silently, waiting for her to play along. She took the glass just as Claudia accidentally tripped, spilling the golden liquid all over her dress. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The soft blue fabric darkened into a blotchy mess, and laughter, low and cruel, followed. Oh, Elena, Claudia sighed dramatically, you should be more careful. Always so clumsy. Victoria clicked her tongue. Go clean up, dear. You're making a scene. Elena froze, her heart pounding in her ears. Making a scene? She had done nothing but exist quietly, and still it was too much for them. Her father turned briefly, saw her soaked dress, and shook his head before turning away again. Disappointed, not in Claudia, but in her. The humiliation burned like acid. Without a word, Elena turned and fled through the ballroom doors, her heels echoing across marble like the sound of breaking glass. She ran past the doorman, down the steps into the biting cold night. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then heavy, washing away her mascara, her dignity, her composure. She didn't care where she went, only that it was away from them, from that house that had never felt like home. The city lights blurred through her tears as she ran, her breath ragged, her dress clinging to her skin. The rain poured harder and the streets emptied until she found herself near the river, trembling beneath a flickering street lamp. Her body shook from cold, but her heart ached more than her frozen hands. She sank onto a bench, hugging her knees, sobs breaking free at last, deep, uncontrollable years of silence exploding into sound. The thunder rolled overhead, but even the storm couldn't drown her grief. Why am I never enough? She whispered into the night. What did I ever do wrong? For a long moment only the rain answered. Then came the hum of an engine, low, smooth, expensive. A black car slowed near the curb. The headlights cut through the rain, bathing her in pale light. She froze, instinctively curling in on herself. The door opened and a tall man stepped out holding an umbrella. He walked toward her, his shoes splashing through puddles, his expression unreadable. Are you all right? He asked gently. His voice was deep, calm, the kind that carried authority but not arrogance. Elena looked up, startled. He was in his early 30s, perhaps, sharp features softened by concern, eyes the color of winter rain. His tailored suit was already damp, yet he seemed unconcerned. "I'm fine," she said automatically, though she looked anything but fine. Drenched, shivering, mascara streaked like ink. He tilted his head, studying her. "You're sitting alone in a storm wearing a soaked evening dress," he said quietly. "That doesn't look fine to me." She didn't reply, clutching her knees tighter. "Please," she murmured. "Just leave me alone." The man hesitated, then shrugged off his coat and held it out to her. "You don't have to talk, but at least stay warm." His tone held no pity, only quiet insistence. She hesitated, torn between fear and exhaustion. But something about his presence, the steadiness in his voice, disarmed her. Slowly, she took the coat. It was heavy, warm, and carried a faint scent of cedar and rain. She wrapped it around herself and whispered, "Thank you." He nodded once, then sat on the far end of the bench, careful to keep space between them. "Bad night?" he asked after a moment. A humorless laugh escaped her. "You could say that. Family?" he guessed. She looked at him sharply, then nodded, tears welling again. "They never cared. Not once. I was just a decoration in their perfect world." She wiped her face, embarrassed by her own words. "Sorry, you don't even know me." "I shouldn't be telling you this." "Maybe that's why you can," he said softly. "Sometimes strangers are safer than family." His words hit something deep in her, truth wrapped in gentleness. They sat there for a while, the rain easing to a drizzle. When he finally stood, he extended a hand. "Come on, there's a small cafe down the street. It's warm and you look like you could use something hot to drink." She hesitated. "I shouldn't." "You should," he interrupted, a faint smile touching his lips. "No expectations, no pressure. Just a place to breathe." For the first time that night, she wanted to believe someone meant what they said. Slowly, she took his hand. His palm was warm, firm, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in years. The cafe was quiet and smelled of coffee and fresh bread. The owner, an elderly woman, gave them a knowing look but said nothing as the man guided Elena to a corner booth. He ordered hot chocolate and a sandwich for her, black coffee for himself. When the drinks arrived, Elena wrapped her fingers around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her bones. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, not meeting his eyes. He stirred his coffee. "Because I've been where you are," he said simply. "Alone, unseen. And sometimes one act of kindness changes everything." She looked up at him then, really looked. He seemed composed, but there was a shadow in his gaze, the kind that comes from knowing pain too well. "I'm Adrian," he said, offering a hand across the table. "Elena," she whispered, taking it. He smiled faintly. "Elena, it suits you." She blushed, unsure why the sound of her name in his voice made her heart flutter. As they talked, the hours slipped by unnoticed. He told her stories, not grand ones, but quiet confessions. How he grew up under expectations heavier than love. How success had been his armor, not his joy. "Money doesn't fix emptiness," he said, glancing at her. "But compassion does." She listened, fascinated. For the first time, someone wasn't talking down to her or looking past her. He spoke to her like she mattered, like her feelings were valid. When the rain finally stopped, Adrian offered to drive her home. She shook her head fiercely. "I can't go back there. Not tonight." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Then you won't. I have a guest house. It's quiet, safe. My housekeeper can give you fresh clothes. You can rest." She hesitated, torn between fear and exhaustion. "You don't even know me," she said again. He smiled softly. "Maybe not yet. But sometimes life brings people together for a reason." Something in his voice now, that calm certainty, made her believe him. And so, for the first time in her life, Elena chose to trust her heart over her fear. She followed him into the night, unaware that this encounter would change everything. Not just her future, but the way she would learn to see herself. Because sometimes, it takes losing everything familiar to discover who you truly are. And for Elena Montrose, that discovery had just begun. Morning came slowly, with light slipping through the tall windows like golden silk. When Elena opened her eyes, she needed a moment to remember where she was. The air smelled faintly of lavender and clean linen. The sheets beneath her were soft, far softer than anything she had ever slept on. For a fleeting second, she thought she had dreamed everything. The rain, the humiliation, the stranger with the quiet eyes. But then she saw the folded jacket on the chair and realized it was real. She sat up, feeling disoriented yet strangely calm. The kind of calm that comes only after the storm has spent itself. The room was elegant but not ostentatious. Pale walls, a single painting of a sunrise over a cliff, and a vase of white lilies that filled the air with sweetness. It was peaceful in a way her family's mansion never had been. As she moved toward the window, she gasped. Below stretched a garden so vast it looked like a painting. Rows of trimmed hedges, marble statues glistening with dew, and a fountain shaped like an angel pouring water from a shell. Beyond the garden rose a larger house, beautiful and modern, its glass windows catching the morning sun. She realized she was in the guest house Adrian had mentioned. For a long moment she simply stood there, trying to take in the surreal reality that her miserable night had ended in a place like this. When she finally left the room, she followed the smell of coffee and something baking down a marble hallway, until she reached a kitchen that looked like a magazine spread brought to life. Adrian stood by the stove, sleeves rolled up, stirring something in a pan. He turned at the sound of her steps, smiling slightly. "Good morning. I was starting to think you'd sleep until noon." Elena blinked, still half embarrassed to be there. "I didn't mean to impose," she said quietly. "You've already done too much." He shook his head and gestured to the table. "You didn't impose. You needed a place to breathe. Sit, eat." Rosa made pancakes. She insists no one can start a day sad if they've had her pancakes. At the mention of her name, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes turned from the counter and smiled warmly. "Good morning, miss. There's tea too, if you prefer." Her voice carried the warmth of someone who had seen many broken souls pass through the same kitchen. Elena murmured her thanks and sat. For the first time in years, she ate without feeling the eyes of judgment on her. The pancakes were soft, golden, and sweet. The tea soothed her trembling hands. For a few quiet minutes, peace felt possible. Adrian sat opposite her, his expression thoughtful. "You should probably call your family," he said gently, "just so they know you're safe." The words made her chest tighten. "They won't care," she whispered. "They're probably just embarrassed I ran off. They'll make it my fault somehow." He studied her face for a moment and then nodded, accepting her truth. "Then don't call yet. Take the day for yourself." She looked up, startled. "You mean I can stay?" "If you want to," he replied simply. "I have more space than I know what to do with. And you look like someone who hasn't been allowed to exist without fear of disapproval." The kindness in his tone nearly broke her again. She lowered her gaze, blinking back tears. "Why are you being so kind to me?" He leaned back, his eyes distant. "Because once, when I had nothing and no one, a stranger gave me kindness too. I promised myself I'd return it whenever I could." Over the course of the day, fragments of his life unfolded between them. He told her how he had been disowned at 19 for refusing to join his father's company. His father had been ruthless, a man who measured worth in wealth and obedience. Adrian had slept in his car for months, working small jobs, saving every penny until he could start his own business. "I built it from the ground up," he said quietly. "Not because I wanted to prove him wrong, but because I wanted to prove I could exist without his shadow." Elena listened, drawn to the quiet strength behind his words. "And now you're successful?" she asked. He gave a small smile. "Some would say that. But success isn't the goal anymore. Peace is." His gaze softened. "And you, Elena, you don't realize it yet, but you have the same fire. You just haven't been given the chance to use it." Later, he showed her the property. The main house was vast but not cold. Sunlight filled the halls, and the walls were adorned with paintings not of power or wealth but of nature. Mountains, rivers, endless skies. "My mother painted most of these," he said quietly. Before she left, she used to tell me art was the only thing that reminded her the world still had color, even when life felt gray. Elena touched one frame lightly, tracing the soft brush strokes. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "She must have been kind." "She was," he said softly. "Too kind for the life my father built." There was a long pause before he added, "I think that's why I built this place, to fill it with kindness again." As evening fell, the two of them sat outside by the garden fountain. The sound of water filled the silence between them. The air smelled of jasmine and rain. Elena's hair shimmered under the fading light, and for the first time she wasn't trying to hide. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted. "I left everything behind." Adrian's gaze was steady. "Then start small. Find what you love, not what they told you to love. The world outside your father's house is bigger than you think." She looked at him, half smiling. You make it sound easy. He chuckled softly. It isn't, but it's worth it. That night back in her room, she lay awake thinking about his words. For so long she had lived in a world where her value was measured by silence and obedience. But here, for the first time, she felt seen. She remembered the way he had spoken of peace, the way he treated every person, from Rosa to the gardeners, with genuine respect. There was something powerful about quiet decency. It was the kind of strength her family's wealth had never understood. She rose and walked to the mirror, studying her reflection. The girl who looked back wasn't the same one who had fled through the rain. There was color in her cheeks again, light in her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of her own story. In the following days, she began to explore. She found a small library tucked behind the drawing room, rows of books about philosophy, business, and art. Adrian caught her there one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by open volumes. He smiled. You read like someone searching for answers. She looked up. Maybe I am. I don't even know who I am without them, without trying to please them. He leaned against the doorframe. Then learn who you are by what brings you alive, not by what keeps others comfortable. His advice settled deep in her chest. He spoke as someone who had already walked through the fire she was just learning to face. One morning she found him in his office, a sleek space filled with sunlight and quiet energy. I want to work, she said, the words tumbling out before she could hesitate. Not charity, real work. I want to earn something that's mine. He raised an eyebrow. You don't have to. I want to, she interrupted gently but firmly. For a moment he studied her, then nodded slowly. All right. My company has an internship program. It's mostly admin work, but it's honest. You'd have to start like everyone else. She smiled for the first time in what felt like years. That's exactly what I want. That afternoon, he gave her a laptop and a few assignments. Simple tasks, but each completed by her own effort. Every small success chipped away at the doubt her family had planted in her. Weeks passed. She began to laugh again, to eat without fear, to walk with her head high. Rosa often teased her that the house had come alive since she arrived. Even Adrian seemed lighter, more at ease, as if her presence had reminded him of something he had long forgotten. They talked late into the evenings about art, about courage, about second chances. One night, when a thunderstorm rolled in, she found herself frightened by the sudden flash of lightning. He appeared in the doorway of her room, offering tea. Storms don't last forever, he said softly. They just remind us how strong the walls we've built are. She smiled through her tears. Thank you for everything. He looked at her for a long moment. You don't owe me thanks. You just needed someone to remind you you're not broken. But even as life began to bloom again, the past had a way of finding its cracks. One morning, Rosa came into the kitchen holding a newspaper. Her eyes were wide. Miss Elena, your father's name is in the news. He's facing some kind of investigation, fraud maybe. It says several partners are pulling out. Elena froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Adrian looked up from his coffee, brows furrowing. Let me see. He scanned the headline quickly, his expression tightening. It looks serious, he murmured. She swallowed hard, her stomach twisting. He'll blame me, she whispered. He always does. Somehow it'll be my fault for not being there, for embarrassing him. Adrian reached across the table, his hand steady on hers. You are not responsible for his choices, he said firmly. You've spent your life apologizing for the pain other people caused. It ends now. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't from weakness, they were from release. All the guilt she'd carried like a chain began to loosen. She nodded, her voice trembling. You're right. It ends now. That night, as the rain returned, she stood at her window watching lightning streak across the sky. She wasn't running anymore. She was learning to stand, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the scars of rejection and fear, a quiet strength was taking root. For the first time in her life, Elena Montrose felt what it meant to belong, not to someone else but to herself. Days turned into weeks, and weeks quietly became months. What began as a night of despair had transformed into a slow awakening. Elena was no longer the timid girl who hid behind polite smiles and silence. She had started to bloom into a woman who looked the world in the eye. The guest house had become her sanctuary, and the work she did for Adrian's company gave her a sense of purpose she had never known. Every morning she woke early, walking through the gardens as dawn broke over the horizon. The air smelled of dew and jasmine, and the soft song of birds reminded her that peace could exist in small, simple moments. Sometimes Adrian joined her on those walks, their steps falling in quiet rhythm. They rarely spoke much in those moments, but there was something profoundly comforting in their silence, a shared understanding that both of them had escaped worlds that had tried to define them. In the office, Elena had earned quiet respect. Though she had started as an intern, her dedication, precision, and honesty soon caught the attention of senior staff. Adrian watched her from afar during meetings, noting how her confidence grew, how her voice began to hold weight. One afternoon, he found her organizing client reports in the conference room, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You're doing the work of 3 people," he said lightly. She looked up and smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just making up for lost time." "No," he said softly. "You're proving to yourself what was always there." Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. In those brief exchanges, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding deeper than gratitude, something that neither dared name. Despite her progress, the world outside their quiet haven was not blind. The news of her father's scandal had spread widely. His empire was crumbling, partners were fleeing, and whispers of deceit filled every business column. One morning, when Elena arrived at the company, she overheard 2 employees talking near the lobby. "Did you hear? The Montrose Corporation might declare bankruptcy. It's all over the news." "Serves them right," the other said bitterly. "They built their fortune on lies." Elena froze, the familiar pain blooming in her chest. Even after everything, the name Montrose still carried the weight of her humiliation. She turned away quickly, not realizing that Adrian had been watching from the mezzanine above. He saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way she pressed her lips together to keep from breaking. Later that day, he called her into his office. When she entered, he wasn't sitting behind his desk but standing by the window, his gaze distant. "Have you seen the news?" he asked without turning. She nodded quietly. "Yes, I try not to read it, but it finds me anyway." He was silent for a moment. "You know," he said finally, "your father's company used to compete directly with mine years ago." She blinked, surprised. "You never mentioned that." "I didn't think it mattered," he said slowly, still watching the city below. "But I suppose it does now." She stepped closer, her pulse quickening. "What are you trying to say?" He turned then, meeting her eyes. "Your father and I crossed paths before, a long time ago. He tried to buy out one of my early projects, something I had built from scratch. When I refused, he used every tactic he could to destroy it. Lies, legal threats, smear campaigns. He nearly succeeded." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "You mean, my father tried to ruin you?" He nodded once. "He saw me as a threat. Back then I was nobody, a young entrepreneur with nothing but ideas. He underestimated how far determination can go." Elena's hands trembled. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Adrian's voice softened. "Because it was never your fault. I didn't want you to carry his sins. When I saw you that night in the rain, I didn't see Richard Montrose's daughter. I saw a girl who had survived him." She stood there in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the man who had lifted her up with the man her father had tried to destroy. "So you helped me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Out of revenge?" Adrian's eyes widened. "No, never. I helped you because I saw myself in you, someone who had been silenced, belittled, made to feel small. The connection to your father was just a shadow of the past. It doesn't define what this is." His words were calm, sincere, but the revelation still stung. She turned away, blinking back tears. "It's just hard to believe my entire life has been a chain of lies. My family lied to me about love, and now even kindness feels like something I don't deserve." "You do deserve it," he said firmly. "You deserve everything good that's coming to you. Don't let your father's cruelty decide what you believe about yourself." For the next few days, Elena threw herself into work, avoiding personal conversations. She smiled when she had to, spoke when required, but something in her heart had gone quiet again. Adrian respected her distance, though he longed to explain further. Late one evening, as the sun melted into gold across the glass walls of the office, he found her alone, sorting papers she had already filed twice. "You're angry with me," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "No, just confused." He sighed, walking closer. "You have every right to be. But I hope you'll believe me when I say I didn't help you out of guilt or strategy. I helped you because I saw someone who deserved to be seen. Her fingers stilled on the papers. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she said softly, I believe you. I just don't know how to stop feeling like I'm still fighting ghosts. He smiled gently. Then fight them. But this time, don't fight alone. That night, she went for a walk through the gardens, the moonlight turning the fountain's water into silver. The sky was clear, and the air held the quiet magic of possibility. She stood there, thinking of her mother, a woman she barely remembered but whose warmth still lingered in the faded photographs her father had hidden away. She whispered into the night, If you can see me, I hope you're proud. Her voice trembled, but it was filled with strength. Behind her, footsteps approached. You talk to the stars too? Adrian asked softly. She smiled faintly without turning. Maybe they listen better than people. He chuckled quietly. Maybe they do. Or maybe they just remind us that light doesn't disappear, even when it's far away. He stood beside her, both looking at the reflection of the moon in the fountain. The silence between them was comfortable now, heavy with unsaid things that didn't need words. Finally she spoke, her voice steady. I want to face my father. Not to argue, not to seek love, just to tell him I'm not afraid anymore. Adrian looked at her, admiration flickering in his eyes. Then I'll stand by you if you want. She shook her head gently. No, I need to do this alone. He nodded, understanding. Then do it. But remember, you're not the same girl he once broke. You've already rebuilt yourself from the ashes. A week later, she found herself standing in front of the Montrose estate, her heart pounding but her steps sure. The grand house looked smaller now, stripped of its illusion of power. Inside, her father sat alone in his study, papers scattered across his desk. His once commanding posture slumped under the weight of ruin. When he looked up and saw her, his eyes widened in shock. Elena? She nodded, standing tall. I came to say goodbye. He frowned, confused. Goodbye? To your family? She met his gaze evenly. You stopped being my family when you decided I wasn't worth kindness. I used to think I needed your approval to exist. I don't anymore. His face hardened. You're ungrateful. Everything you had came from me. Her voice didn't waver. Everything I have now came from me. From the strength you never saw. For the first time he had no words. She turned, her heart racing but her spirit free, and walked out into the sunlight without looking back. When she returned to Adrian's estate that evening, Rosa greeted her with tears in her eyes and a warm embrace. You did it, didn't you? She whispered. Elena nodded, smiling through tears. I did. Later, when Adrian saw her in the garden, he didn't ask for details. He only said, You look lighter. She laughed softly. Maybe because I finally stopped carrying someone else's pain. He smiled. Then that's the beginning of real freedom. As the stars emerged above them, Elena realized that the mansion she once ran to in desperation had become something entirely different. A symbol not of rescue, but of rebirth. She wasn't the broken girl who had fled a ballroom in tears. She was a woman who had learned that strength isn't loud or vengeful. It's quiet, steady, and kind. The pain that once defined her had become her teacher, and the man who had found her in the rain had become her mirror, reflecting the courage she had forgotten she possessed. And somewhere between gratitude and affection, between healing and hope, a new chapter was quietly beginning to write itself. The world outside the mansion was turning to autumn, and with it came a season of quiet reflection. Leaves blazed gold and amber, drifting across the marble steps like slow-moving sparks, and the air carried that sharp, nostalgic scent that only fall can bring, a reminder that even endings can be beautiful. Inside the house, life had found a calm rhythm. Elena had officially become part of Adrian's company, no longer as an intern but as a project coordinator. The office staff now looked to her for direction, and Adrian, who once carried every burden alone, had begun to rely on her insight. What had started as rescue had become partnership, yet beneath that harmony, a question had begun to stir inside her heart, quiet but persistent, whispering of feelings she was afraid to name. She admired him, of course. She trusted him, respected him, but there were moments when his gaze lingered just a little too long, when his hand brushed hers as they looked over a file, when the air between them felt charged with something deeper, Something fragile and sacred. Adrian too felt the change. He told himself to keep a careful distance, reminding his heart that Elena was rebuilding her life and didn't need confusion woven into her healing. But the more time they spent together, the harder it became to draw that line. He found himself watching her laugh with Rosa in the kitchen or listening to her discuss new ideas in meetings and realizing she had filled the house with a kind of warmth he hadn't felt in years. The mansion that once echoed with emptiness now carried the sound of her voice, light and alive. It frightened him, that realization, because caring for her meant confronting parts of himself he had long buried, including the guilt tied to a secret he had never shared. Every time he looked at her, that guilt stirred, reminding him that their lives had been entangled long before the night he found her in the rain. One chilly evening, after a long day at work, Adrian invited Elena for dinner in the main house. Rosa had prepared roasted vegetables and a delicate soup, and the dining room was lit only by the soft glow of candles. The atmosphere felt almost too intimate, but neither of them spoke of it. They talked instead about the small victories of the week, how the company had launched a new charity initiative for underprivileged students, how Elena's idea for community scholarships had been met with overwhelming support. "You've built something good, Adrian," she said sincerely, looking at him over the flickering light. "Not just for yourself, but for others. You give people hope." He smiled faintly, his gaze softening. "You do the same, Elena. You just don't see it yet." For a moment, the silence between them felt alive, full of everything they weren't saying. Then he rose, pouring more tea to steady himself. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly. "Something I should have told you months ago." She tilted her head, curious but not alarmed. "What is it?" He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the teapot. "Your father and I, our conflict went deeper than I told you. It wasn't just business rivalry. There was something else. Something he did that changed both our lives." Elena's heart began to pound. "What do you mean?" He took a breath, his voice low and careful. "Years ago, before my company succeeded, I developed a prototype for a renewable energy project, something that could have changed the market. Your father discovered it through a mutual investor. He offered to fund it under his company's name, but when I refused, he had the design stolen. He filed the patent under his own corporation, claimed it as Montrose property, and made millions before the truth ever surfaced. By the time I proved it was mine, the damage was done. I lost everything." He paused, eyes shadowed with memory. "That betrayal nearly broke me." Elena sat frozen, her mind reeling. "So when you found me that night," she began slowly, "you already knew who I was?" He nodded. "I did. I knew you were his daughter. But when I saw you there alone, drenched, crying, I didn't see the Montrose name. I saw someone innocent. Someone suffering from the same cruelty that had once been aimed at me." I couldn't walk away. For a long time she said nothing. The candlelight flickered against her face, revealing a storm of emotions. Shock, sadness, disbelief, and something deeper that even she couldn't define. "You should have told me," she whispered finally. "You should have trusted me with the truth." "I know," he said quietly. "I wanted to, but I was afraid it would hurt you. And I didn't want you to think my kindness had strings attached. It never did." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "You were the one person who made me believe in sincerity again, and now I don't know how to feel." Adrian's voice broke slightly. "Feel whatever you need to, Elena. Anger, confusion, it's all fair. But don't doubt that what I've felt for you every moment since that night has been real." He stepped back, giving her space, and she stood there motionless, her eyes glistening. Then without another word she turned and left the dining room, the echo of her footsteps heavy in the quiet house. For days afterward, the mansion felt hollow again. Elena moved her belongings back into the guest house, immersing herself in work, avoiding long conversations. Rosa tried gently to comfort her, but Elena's heart was a whirlpool of contradictions. Part of her understood Adrian's silence, his desire to protect her from her father's sins, but another part of her ached with the feeling of betrayal. She spent long nights sitting by her window, staring at the garden where they used to talk, trying to piece together what the truth meant. One evening, she found herself remembering the day her mother died, a memory she had buried deep. Her mother had once said, "Kindness is the rarest form of courage." Those words echoed now, whispering through her confusion. If she wanted to live by those words, she realized, She would have to find the strength to forgive, not because Adrian deserved it, but because she did. Forgiveness, after all, was freedom. The following morning she walked to the main house. Adrian was in his office, the weight of sleepless nights etched across his face. When she entered, he looked up, startled. "Elena," he began, but she raised a hand gently. "Don't, just listen." She walked toward him slowly, her expression calm but resolute. "You should have told me the truth, yes. But I understand why you didn't. You were trying to separate me from my father's shadow, and maybe I needed that. You showed me that my worth wasn't tied to anyone's name. For that, I can't hate you." Her voice softened. "But you have to understand something too. Trust is not something you rebuild with words. It takes time. I need that time." Adrian's throat tightened, but he nodded. "You'll have it," he said quietly. "Every moment you need." In the weeks that followed, they worked side by side again, not as they once had, but as two people carefully rebuilding the bridge between them. Their conversations were measured, their laughter slower to return, but there was a quiet sincerity that replaced the old intensity. Adrian respected her distance, never pushing, never apologizing in empty words. He showed his remorse in actions, in the way he ensured her scholarship project expanded, in the way he listened to her ideas as if they were gospel. Slowly, the walls around her heart began to soften again. One evening, while reviewing project proposals, Elena looked at him and realized something she hadn't before. He wasn't the man who had taken anything from her. He was the man who had helped her find herself, even when it cost him his peace. Winter came early that year, bringing snow that blanketed the gardens in silence. One night, as flakes drifted against the window, Adrian found Elena outside by the frozen fountain, her breath misting in the cold. She turned when she heard his footsteps. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Even frozen, the water still shines." He nodded, standing beside her. "That's the thing about beauty. It doesn't vanish when things get cold. It just changes form." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the same man who had offered her a coat in the rain, who had given her safety when she had nothing. "You never really stopped saving me," she said quietly. "Even when I didn't want you to." His voice was low. "Maybe you saved me too." The snow fell heavier now, and for a long moment neither moved. Then softly she reached for his hand. It was a small gesture, but in that simple act, the distance between them melted. From that night onward, something in their bond shifted, not rushed or confessed in dramatic declarations, but understood in silence. They began to share not only work and conversation, but purpose. Together they launched a foundation under a new name. No longer Montrose or Adrian's brand, but something entirely their own. The Haven Initiative, dedicated to helping people escape toxic homes and rebuild independent lives. The irony was not lost on either of them. Both had once been prisoners of their family's cruelty, and now they were building sanctuaries for others. When the press interviewed them, Elena stood beside him, poised and radiant, speaking not as a rescued girl, but as a leader with vision. "Our pasts don't define us," she told the cameras. "They prepare us to create something better." That evening, when the reporters were gone, Adrian turned to her and smiled faintly. "You've come a long way from the girl who ran through the rain." She laughed softly, eyes bright. "And you've come a long way from the man who thought peace was impossible." He looked at her then with the quiet awe of someone who knows he's witnessing a miracle. "You were the shock I never expected," he said. "Not the storm that broke me, but the one that brought everything back to life." Elena's smile trembled as tears filled her eyes. Then maybe we were each other's second chance. And beneath the glow of the winter lights, as snow continued to fall over the mansion that had once been a place of pain and now stood as a home of healing, both of them understood that some storms don't come to destroy. They come to clear the way for something new to grow. Spring returned to the world like a promise fulfilled. The snow melted from the marble edges of the fountains, the air grew softer, and the first wildflowers began to bloom across the edges of the garden paths that Elena loved to walk. Life, it seemed, had found its rhythm again. The Haven Initiative had become more than a dream. It was a living force of change. Survivors of broken homes, abandoned youth, and silenced dreamers were finding their footing through the programs Elena and Adrian built together. Every week new letters arrived, people thanking them for giving them courage to start again. And each message was a mirror of their own journey, A reminder that healing ripples outward when even one person dares to be kind. The world now saw them as a powerful pair. The calm, visionary businessman and the young woman who spoke with a fire that touched hearts. But within those public faces lived two souls who had learned that true success was not built on wealth or recognition, but on the quiet peace that comes from doing something that matters. Elena had grown into a woman of unshakable grace. She moved through the halls of the foundation with quiet confidence, her laughter echoing where silence once lived. Gone was the timid girl who once feared her own reflection. She no longer sought her father's approval or validation from anyone. She had learned that self-worth cannot be given, it must be claimed. People around her admired her poise, but very few knew the nights she had spent questioning her strength or the moments she had stood in front of the mirror whispering, "You are enough." Adrian watched her transformation with a mix of pride and reverence. She was no longer someone he protected. She was his equal, his partner in vision, and though neither of them had spoken it aloud, his partner in heart. Their connection had deepened beyond gratitude, beyond circumstance. It had become a quiet companionship woven from shared scars and mutual respect. He often caught himself wondering how he had survived the years before she came into his life, before her laughter softened the edges of his solitude. One morning, a letter arrived addressed to Elena in an unfamiliar handwriting. The postmark bore the name of a hospital. She read it slowly, her hands trembling as she absorbed the words. It was from her father's assistant. Richard Montrose had fallen ill, heart complications worsened by stress and years of denial, and was asking to see her. The world that she had left behind suddenly pressed against her chest again. She sat in silence for a long time, the letter resting in her lap before Adrian entered the room. He saw the look on her face and immediately understood that something heavy had arrived. "He's sick," she said quietly, her voice distant. "He wants to see me." Adrian studied her expression carefully. "You don't have to go," he said gently. "You owe him nothing." She looked up, her eyes calm but resolute. "I know, but I owe myself closure. I need to look him in the eyes one last time, not for his peace, but for mine." The next day, Adrian drove her to the hospital. The city outside looked unchanged. But for Elena, it felt like walking through an old dream she had outgrown. When she entered the sterile white room, the man who had once towered over her life lay diminished by time and consequence. Richard Montrose's eyes opened, dull and uncertain as he turned toward her. For a long moment they simply stared at each other, father and daughter bound by blood but separated by everything that mattered. "Elena," he rasped, his voice weak. "You came." She nodded, stepping closer. "I did." His hand trembled as he gestured toward the chair beside him. "I've lost everything," he whispered. "The company, the partners, the friends, all gone. Maybe I deserve it." There was bitterness in his tone, but also something like regret. "You were right to leave," he murmured. "I never treated you the way a father should." Elena felt the ache of old wounds stirring, yet beneath it there was no hatred left, only a vast quiet. "You hurt me deeply," she said softly, "but I don't want revenge. I forgave you a long time ago. Not because you asked for it, but because I didn't want your cruelty to define who I am anymore." He looked at her, tears gathering in eyes that had rarely shown weakness. "You sound like your mother," he whispered. "She would be proud." For the first time in years, Elena smiled, not in bitterness, but in peace. She reached out and held his hand, not as a daughter seeking love, but as a soul offering compassion to another. In that small gesture, the weight of a lifetime lifted. When she stepped out of the hospital into the sunlight, Adrian was waiting by the car. The moment their eyes met, she didn't need to speak. He understood everything from the calm on her face. "It's done," she said simply. He nodded, opening the door for her. As they drove away, she leaned her head against the window, watching the city blur past, the same city where she had once run crying through the rain. Now the reflection in the glass was different. She no longer saw a girl abandoned. She saw a woman reborn. That evening, when they returned home, she walked straight to the gardens. The sun was setting, bathing the fountains and pathways in amber light. Adrian joined her, silent as always, giving her space to breathe. "He looked so small," she said finally. "I used to think he was this giant shadow I could never escape. But he's just a man, broken and scared." Adrian's voice was soft. "You broke the cycle, Elena. That's what true strength is. Ending pain without passing it on. She turned toward him, her eyes glistening. You helped me remember that. Months passed and the Haven Initiative expanded internationally. News outlets called it a revolution in humanitarian entrepreneurship, praising its model of combining business discipline with emotional recovery. But for Elena and Adrian, it was never about publicity. They still spent evenings in the garden, sipping tea, talking about small things, books, constellations, dreams. One night, under a sky scattered with stars, Adrian finally broke the silence that had lingered between them. There's something I've been meaning to say, he began, his voice low and steady. When I first met you, I thought I was saving you. But I realize now you were the one who saved me. From the loneliness, from the bitterness that success couldn't cure. He looked at her with a tenderness that needed no explanation. You turned my house into a home again. She smiled through tears, her heart full. And you taught me that not all power destroys, and some power protects, some power heals. Maybe we both just needed someone to remind us what love without fear feels like. He took a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a delicate ring. Simple, elegant, and meaningful like everything between them. This isn't about ownership or redemption, he said quietly. It's about building tomorrow together, not as savior and rescued, but as equals. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, tears shining in her eyes. Yes, she whispered. Not because I need you to complete me, but because you make the world feel whole. In that moment, the past ceased to have power. There was no ballroom humiliation, no betrayal, no storm. Only two people who had found light in each other's broken places. The night wind carried the faint scent of roses as they stood together beneath the stars, and somewhere in the distance, the fountain sang softly, like the echo of rain that had once brought them together. Years later, when people told Elena's story, the girl who had once run away crying and found her destiny in kindness, they spoke of her as an inspiration. They said she taught the world that dignity can grow even from heartbreak, that every fall can become the first step of a new ascent. And whenever young women came to the Haven trembling and uncertain, she would sit with them and say, "Pain doesn't mean you're weak. It means your heart still hopes for something better." She never mentioned her own tears or the night she met the man who changed everything. Those memories were sacred, tucked away like a quiet prayer. For her, life was no longer about surviving the past. It was about creating a future worth living. And so, in the mansion that had once been a refuge for two lost souls, laughter once again filled the halls. The crystal chandeliers no longer reminded her of tears. They sparkled now like the reflection of dreams reborn. The world outside kept moving, but within those walls something eternal had taken root. Love built not on rescue but on respect. Peace born not from perfection but from understanding. Elena often stood at the garden window in the evenings, watching the sun melt into gold across the sky, whispering softly to herself the words that had become her creed. The rain was never meant to drown me. It was meant to help me grow. And in that truth, she found everything she had ever needed, not wealth, not revenge, not validation, but freedom, forgiveness, and the gift of tomorrow.